Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Loreweek. How are things? It's okay, this has been an interesting week for news. Naturally, all we're going to do non-stop is talk about politics. No, I'm kidding. As usual, did you guys know at the very beginning of every Loreweek we discuss show news? And I wanted to mention that we are currently in the middle of the floodgates cycle for next year's Friday Ruminations. Now, as a quick reminder, we are in the nominations phase. I'm also somewhat proud of you guys. Last year you guys nominated, I think it was like 120 things for 25 slots. The ridiculous majority of those didn't get even a single vote. By contrast, this year you guys are only up to, I can pull up the document right now, 70. Well, 68 at the moment, but still 70 overall. So, very proud of you guys for showing a little bit of restraint. And I just realized I'm on the wrong playlist. That's okay. Warcraft's music is cool, right? Right? Nah, hang on. We'll try something different today. We'll play a single song for all the Loreweek. Well, it's funny you say that, Mike Romano, because we'll actually be talking about why that's okay when it comes to the voting cycle. I don't want to talk about the voting just yet, but I do want to go more in depth into it to make sure people understand, because the entire, well, one of like 7 reasons we use the voting method we do is so that people can vote for their favorites regardless, so that strategic voting is removed from the equation entirely, which is one of the major points of the voting system we use. What is strategic voting? Tune in later when we actually open up the floodgates thing, and I will discuss it in more depth there. Funny little side note. So one of the many things, I have a wish list of things to do with regards to setting up the new computer. And you're like, didn't you build this computer in December? Yeah. I've been slowly making my way through the list, and I only have 3 things left on it. One of them is finishing sorting out all my music. I'm down to only 575 songs left to sort. And if you don't know what that means, well, it was a much, much bigger number than that. Like in the 3,000 range. 3,000-ish songs that I've been spending like 10 minutes a day just going through and sorting into their various playlists. Yeah, I got a little behind on that. It's been doubly irritating, though, because I keep wanting to update my phone, but there's no reason to update my phone until I'm done updating my music, so, you know, hashtag first world problems or whatever. Anyways. Yes, we have the boost thing up as well. Hopefully that'll happen tomorrow when we're playing Assassin's Creed Unity, and not today when we're discussing My Little Pony. As much as I am actually legitimately proud of you guys, I would still rather not have that be the thing that people find me via. While we're on the subject, it is probably also worth noting that I know that this is going to sound very strange, but I don't really have a big agenda when it comes to my videos. I know, it's shocking. We'll discuss that later. I think that's actually it for show news. There's not a lot going on right now. We are doing the floodgates a little bit early. There's a few reasons why. I was actually talking about it with Sis just a few days ago. I am at a point where I'm pretty close to finishing up Star Trek. As in, I have 2 seasons left of Enterprise, which is not that much. That's basically 3 weeks of work if I take my time. And I've got the animated series, which is like a week. So that's 4 weeks just to finish up Star Trek, and I kind of really want to get that done. Because, I don't know, because it's still fresh in my mind, and it's the whole airplane analogy I've used before. You know, I'm in the plane. I know how to use this plane. My mind is in the mindset of driving this particular plane, right? I can't be the only person who likes to not constantly shift lanes as I'm working, right? Like, that can't just be me. So I kind of want to finish up the Trek stuff. But I can't justify taking off what is effectively going to be about a month and a half in order to just sit down and do the Trek stuff without also doing next year's Floodgates. That's why we went ahead and did it. Now we're going to go ahead and do those movies as well, whichever ones get in. By the way, when we get to the voting thing, make sure to vote for the Pixar block. You don't have to. But I am going to legitimately campaign for it because I actually want to discuss the Pixar films. I think there's a lot to unpack and discuss there, especially given the fact that one of the films I discussed last year, which will be going live later this year, is the film Up, which is a Pixar film and is awesome. And there was a lot to discuss. It was a good rumination film. You know, not just a film that's enjoyable. There was a lot to talk about. So, plug. Random news. There's a whole bunch of random stuff that happened this week. God, I don't even know where to begin. There's stuff we won't even be talking about. There's the fact that Tencent bought out Klai, which is just terrible. Klai, I actually don't know how to pronounce that. There's some things going on with Twitter, which is just, I'm not even touching with a 10-foot pole. There's the fact that people won't shut up about political bipartisanship, which, again, I won't talk about with a 10-foot pole. But I think the most important takeaway is the fact that we need to talk about economics. And for once, I'm hesitant. So let's just shuffle right over random news and switch right up to economics. Now, hang on. Future me, timestamp here. Let me start by saying I'm not going to address or discuss the specific situation all that much. Okay? Now you're probably thinking, why? It's not controversial. No, it's not, or at least it shouldn't be. There are people who are trying to make it a partisan issue, and those people are stupid. But, because trust me, this is a bipartisan issue. It's practically the definition of one. But the actual specific reason is twofold. Number one, this is a developing situation, and as weird as it may sound, it doesn't matter yet. We're not there. We're not at the point where consequences have happened. I'm going to try to use a really stupid analogy to explain this, so I hope you bear with me under here. But all of this stuff that's happening right now does not matter yet. You know why? Dice, right? What is this? Well, we got a D10 and a D6, okay? Now, imagine I do not look at the results there. That's the exact moment we're at right now. The dice have been thrown, but no one's looked at the results yet. And there's another phase that's going to happen after that when people are going to judge the results of those dice, okay? That's where we are. So I'm not going to address the specific situation because it doesn't matter yet. With me? Now, let's talk about the generic situation, because I got 3, I think, topics to mention with regards to the generic situation. Let's start by talking about influence. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that you have $1 million. Now, I've talked before, and forgive me. What is the most guaranteed, most reliable way to get rich? I know most of you know the answer, but it's important to start here because where we're going where. To already be rich. Now, it's worth noting, and I always say this because it's important, this isn't just about elitism or classism. There is elitism and classism involved, but that's, even if that was somehow magically removed, you would still have a problem because of math. The simple math is, if you have the option to reach out and buy 8 different types of apples and try all 8 of them, and only like one of them, then you have more options available to you than the person who can only buy a single apple and has to pick and choose and hope that they get an apple they actually like. It's straight math. There's not really a lot that can be done about that. So, influence on markets. Now, I use the term markets. It's an extremely generic term, and it barely qualifies, so bear with me here. But influence upon financial speculative markets, specifically, usually lists on something I call weight. I got that from a teacher, actually, so I suppose it's not one of my own terminologies, but whatever. Weight is people and money, which should probably sound familiar because that's exactly how I have my own runs funded. The more people that put into something, the more something is funded. The more money put into something, the more something is funded. This is a similar system to how many speculative markets utilize here in the United States. Now, I don't know foreign markets that well, so I don't know how this works in other countries, okay? Just want to get that proviso out there. I have studied the global economy, but that's at the macro level, not at the level we're talking about, which is several steps down from that. So, weight. Now, having so much weight in an environment like a speculative market or a specific future or a specific stock or a specific interest is something that you can do to try and put the finger on the scale and push the scale down or let the scale up, depending on how much weight you're putting on it. This is why he was calling it weight. And you can also do it like over here or over here. Now, weight to explain weight in the simplest way I possibly can, 1 million people who all invest $1 have the same weight as one person who invests $1 million. Now that's important because it is something that has been exploited and utilized for literally centuries at this point. Now that's getting into foreign markets, obviously, the markets, since this has been done since before the United States has existed, is what I'm trying to say. But this is the general model. What tends to happen is a group of people get together and say, hey, you over there, oh, that's easy loaner, but that's fractional loaning, and that's kind of different. So, I have no idea what you're talking about, Mike Romano, so forgive me for ignoring you completely until you actually explain yourself. Because I don't want to lose my train of thought. Let's assume for a moment that a group of people, let's assume that Mike Romano in chat right now wants to have some influence on a market, either within a specific future or just a general category like food produce, or maybe he wants to go in and try to, be active within certain stocks. And Mike Romano can't because he is not rich. Sorry, Mike Romano. It's okay, none of us are rich here. So he wants to go in and he wants to have influence on this. Well, what can he do about this? Well, he has a great idea. Why doesn't he go and start talking to Hazardous and Nas and Loner and Platy and Chocolate Rob and Twister and Pave Maniac and Little Billy and Dallas? He says, hey, we all have a little bit of interest in this thing, right? We all have a little bit of interest in this particular company. Why don't we get together and have like an organization, a company, if you will, that holds all of the general ownership of all of these things, all of these stocks, and thus, as a group, can provide influence and weight that the individuals can't. Now, this is basics, really, so forgive me for going over this, but I'm trying to explain what trading companies and hedge funds and just general, the many, many, many different types, because there's actually like 20 different types of companies, which is really stupid if you ask me. 20-ish different types of companies that all are effectively this basic concept. We will allow all of you to trade through us, but the group that is actually controlling these trades is the company. Thus, we now have weight. Now I gotta read what Mike Romano said. Oh no, you're absolutely correct, Mike Romano. I must have misspoken, because I don't think I said anything to contradict that, but you are correct. This is one of the reasons why the company thing that I just described exists. Now, so this is weight. This is why these kind of groups exist, okay? Now's the first thing I want to cover. I wanted to start with the bare bones. Forgive me. I don't want to sound like I am condescending, but I know several people who know less than what I just described about the stock market in general and financing and investing in specific. So I wanted to kind of start with a bare bones grounding there, okay? Now I'm going to pause for a moment now that I've got that first point out of the way. Someone asked me, how can you lend and sell more stocks than available? So that's called fractionalism, or fractionaling, or fractionizing, depending on which particular version you want to use. The idea is, and this is this is actually ludicrously complicated, because it's not, at its most bare bones level, fractional economics is when you apply economic pressure with nothing. Now that sounds simple, but it's super not. Because it's actually a good thing within reason, which probably sounds familiar because an enormous amount of things in real life are good within reason. As long as you're within the realm of reasonability, a surprising number of things are actually totally cool. Go figure. So, fractional... let's assume for a moment that you... Oh, God. You're making me come up with an example right off the top of my head. It's almost like within reasonability, it's fine, Sierra Mike. Let's assume you make stock based off of... I'm going to try to use a stock. It's worse with stock. It's easier with banking. But let's say that... You know what? I'll use Hazardous as an example. That will keep food. Let's say that I borrow an apple from Hazardous. I promise I'll return it to him later. But then someone else borrows the apple from me and promises the same. So now two of us owe Hazardous an apple, whereas only the one apple that was borrowed exists. And he can then say, well, hey, I've got this apple. You know, the Sierra Mike, who is the third person who just borrowed the apple. Sierra Mike can then say, oh, hey, I've got this apple. This is totally an apple, trust me. It's not a... Ahem. I've got this apple, so I'll let you take a bite out of this apple in exchange for that carrot over there. And then that person can say, okay, well, now I've got this bite of this apple, so I can lend out this bite of an apple to someone else and get this carrot, and it can just go as far or as little as it wants to. It's all about invented wealth. That is the actual concept. That's what it's called. Now, invented wealth is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it could be argued to be a mandatory thing at a national level. And that's kind of the key. Invented wealth is actually very important at a national level, because otherwise a decent amount of the national infrastructure of economics as a concept would not function. However, you can see so easily that I probably don't even have to explain it, just how effortlessly easy it is for someone or someones to abuse the concept of invented wealth. Because, you know, rich. So, I hope that helps a little bit, but if it doesn't, that's okay, because I wasn't prepared to talk about that. So let's talk about stock manipulation next. This is actually the grayest topic we'll be talking about. I want you to imagine for a moment that you work at a video game company, and you have just produced Video Game 37, The Visioning. And as you're producing this game, you decide at the next E3, or digital E3, since that's the era we're in now, to go ahead and do a big announcement about Vidya 33, The Visioning. Now, what you just did is stock manipulation. This is what I wanted to start with, this because this is an enormously gray topic that has been legally debated for longer than the United States has existed. Because just about anything you do with regards to that is something that could easily be qualified as stock manipulation. Now, why is this relevant? Well, because stock manipulation is illegal. However, the illegality of stock manipulation is really loosely defined, and for good reason, because again, just about anything you do that affects your stocks is something that is stock manipulation. I had a picture that I was going to save and show, and I'm not sure if I actually have it here. I had a busy morning. What do you want from me? Oh god, I'm not going to find it, am I? It should be like right there, and it's not. So the point is, while stock manipulation is illegal, it is so loosely defined that actually sitting down and saying this is stock manipulation is, well, it's a lot harder to do than it sounds. It is much harder to prove, and there's all sorts of vagueness on purpose, so that it really boils down to the specific case, the specific judge, and or the specific jury that is involved in any given case that is calling into question stock manipulation, okay? It is a nice big morass. The only reason I'm mentioning that is because one of the common things that has been coming up with regards to the recent events is, oh, well, this is stock manipulation, and while that's true, how much of that is acceptable and how much of that is not is a lot more vague of a question than it sounds. It also boils down to whether or not stock manipulation should be allowed, which is a completely separate and unrelated question, and far more philosophical and political. So, third topic. This is the big one. I actually have some notes here to help me because honestly, this is stupid. What is short selling? Now, let me start by saying that it is my personal and frankly professional opinion that short selling should not be allowed. That if you are going to, that the very concept of short selling should be illegal. Let me just start with that, okay? Now, that's not because short selling in and of itself is a bad concept, because there's actually some legitimate value to it. It's that it's about how easy something is to be manipulated for corrupt or ill intent. On the one hand, anything can be made into be a bad thing, right? I mean, that's how life works. But the way I tend to think of it is it's a bit of a gradient for how easy it is for something to turn horrible. And the easier it is for it to be turned horrible, the more likely I am inclined to say that that should probably be illegal. And short selling is incredibly easy to manipulate. So, I borrow, I sell, price goes down. I buy, I win. That's the summary of short selling. Let's talk about the two sides of that. So, why would you do it? Why would you actually go about short selling? Well, let's say that let's go back to the apples argument. Everyone uses bananas for some reason. Not sure why that became a meme. Let's say that let's not use food. Let's just use a straight example. I buy 100 stocks. Boom. There we go. And those 100 stocks. That's true, Chocolate Rob. I buy 100 stocks. Okay. Now those stocks are currently valued at $10 a share. Now, let's ignore why the seller would. I'm sorry, I didn't say buy. I meant lend. Sorry. This is so stupid. I actually have to work at it to wrap my mind around it. So please forgive me. Let's start over. You own 100 shares in EA. Now, you decide to lend to me those 100 shares. In response to this, I make a legal document, a binding contractual agreement, to pay you for those shares. Okay. Now, let us say that the price then, I go ahead and use the borrow of these, and I sell these shares as a consequence of the fact that I have borrowed them. I get the money now. Then the prices go down per share. I now have to pay you how much that the shares are worth now for the things I have legally lent. I pay you how much that the shares are currently worth. Let's say the shares drop to $5. Again, keeping the simple numbers. So I now owe you $5 a share, which is $500. I lent them, sold them for $1,000. Prices go down. I buy them back to you, from you, for $500. $500 profit. Very simple. And yeah, there's a lot of specific red tape that I am dodging here because there's actually a lot to this, believe it or not. Strangely enough, short selling is already pretty regulated. It's not regulated enough. Because I have to do it at a certain time. There's a certain interest which is determined by a bajillion factors, which I have to pay you regardless of all of the factors. There's the fact that I have to agree to certain... God, I don't remember the term. There's 3 or 4 other steps I have to go through to accomplish this in order to buy these stocks from you. Or, excuse me, borrow these stocks from you, sell the stocks, and then buy the stocks from you. Okay? But once you do that, once you have all that paperwork and all that infrastructure in place, and you set the timeline and you pay the interest, profit. Okay? Now, that... I hope explains why people would want to short sell, regardless of manipulation. It should be immeasurably easy to understand why that system is so easy to be manipulated. Because again, stock manipulation. That's one of the reasons I put that second bullet point in there. because it is illegal to stock manipulate. But again, that's pretty gray and is being redefined on a bi-yearly basis, if not a yearly basis at this point, because what is stock manipulation? And that's why I started with that simple explanation there. Thank you very, very much, Sacred King. Now, I will lend out Sacred King sub. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. Yeah, oh, apples just aren't doing well. Basically, it is incredibly easy to legally manipulate the stock market in order to push that price down to guarantee that I make money. This, by the way, is normal. And I want to stress that as hard as I possibly can. This is nothing new, and this is something that happens on a daily basis. This is incredibly normal. Not saying that's acceptable, but I wanted to point out how mundane this is. It is one of the reasons why I'm kind of happy that this incident has happened one way or another, because if nothing else, it has brought people's attention to something that has been happening for for longer than I've been alive. Now, everything. Now, Eitri asks the relevant question. Everything I just said makes sense, right? And it makes perfect sense why I would want to borrow, to sell, to buy in order to make money, right? Well, why would someone lend? What's the benefit for the other side of that? Well, that's actually really simple. This is where this gets a little bit problematic, because you have to remember that most of the people lending out those stocks to be sold, to then be bought, in other words, who are the lender outs of the short selling, are not people, they're companies. Now, companies, they tend to make money off of this pretty much regardless, because that's not really their stocks that they're trading. If you remember, I structured this on purpose. The whole point of starting those groups, the whole point of starting that is to have influence over a decent amount of stocks. But the other thing is, now that there's a company who doesn't actually own these stocks, but can use them at will to make money on their own. If you're paying attention, this is basically just another version of banking. It's a slightly more complex version of banking, but that is what this is. You put your money in the bank uses your money to make money. With me? Now, how do they make money off this? Well, if you were paying attention earlier, and I wouldn't blame you if you weren't, because this is pretty complex, and I kept screwing up my words, they charge interest. There is a percentage, so the person borrowing has to pay the person lending interest, a percentage fee regardless. Whether they make money or sell money or whatever, doesn't matter. That is something that they do have to pay out. So the company who is doing the lending makes money no matter what. Now, I don't mean to sound incredibly cynical, but how many individual people who do trades do you think actually manage those trades themselves? Oh, there are people, of course. But for the most part, those stocks are traded by the brokers. The companies that they actually reach out to, the companies that they have those shares through, are the ones who actually do the trading and actually do the manipulating and actually do the selling and buying and trading and all that fun stuff. It's one of the reasons why financial planners and managers are an entire profession. Because there are people whose its only job is to deal with your money so that you don't have to. You ever heard of the phrase, let's make your money go to work for you? Well, your money's not doing the work. It's the person in that company who's doing it for you. If it's not obvious by my tone, this is another thing I'm not in favor of, but this is a pretty difficult thing to fix. It's also very incestuous. And I use that term very specifically because, and this is something I've railed about before, so forgive me. I'm not going to go off on a huge topic here. I just want to re-emphasize the fact that there is an entirely too much amount of money that is sitting stagnant in this one little pool over here in investing. And it's just cycling around and not getting out into the economy. And that's bad, in my opinion. There are people who disagree with that. There are people who think it's good to have isolated infrastructures and isolated environments when it comes to economics. I am not one of those people. But again, there it is. So that's why. That is exactly why they would lend out. Because the company lending out the shares makes money no matter what. And there is another variable here. Because, well, what if some individual person wants to lend out their shares? Well, then they're an idiot. No, I'm kidding. There are weird financial reasons to lend out even when you think a stock is going to go down and you're going to lose money on it. And when I say weird reasons, I mean, I'm not sure I can properly describe it because it has to do with having guaranteed income which counts in different ways than factual income. Even though guaranteed income may or may not be factual income. But if you have a guaranteed thing that says, hey, this can come in, therefore you can use that guarantee in order to accomplish other things financially. You can use that, you can say that, you can show that, and hey, guaranteed. Is that stupid? Yes! Sorry. I think that's stupid. I need to keep adding I think on this one, because economics is not really a factual thing. It's an opinion thing, and I know that. You get 20 economists in a room, well-versed, well-meaning, no political agenda or bias. They will still probably disagree about all the things I'm saying here, because it's an opinion thing. That's actually it. That's the main thing I wanted to talk about. And now Loner's asking an unrelated question here. So, Loner says, it is my understanding that value is actually generated by trading, and since those people with long positions... Okay, first of all, let's stop right there. Value is generated by trading is only one of like 30 variables that's involved, so let's just get that out of the way. Since those people with long positions retain stocks and block them from being lent in order to short, the actual value of the company will start falling. So, again, let's jump in there, because actual value implies actual value, which is not true here. It's perceived value. Now, perceived value can have actual results. Duh, perception can affect reality. Well, welcome to life. But I do want to clarify that, because the actual value of the company can and may not change at all. Something that can and has happened is the perceived value of a company torpedoes and goes down the toilet, but the actual tactical, factual value of the company remains static. They still have the assets, they still have the employees, they still have the product, they still have the revenue. And so in some cases this has caused some interesting bounce back between the two, because sometimes the company has not bent to the stock. And sometimes the stock, and what tends to happen more often, admittedly, is the stock bends the company, even though it probably shouldn't under certain circumstances. What can also happen in some circumstances is a situation where the company... So what you probably are thinking, what do you mean the company bows to the stock? Well, let's say the company has this value and the stocks say it has this value. Well, we need to fix this up. So what tends to happen is the company will divest itself, basically. I think that's the wrong word. The company will... There's a lot of weird economic words, and I admit my vocabulary is bad about it. But what they will do is they'll go ahead and start selling, or pushing for a release, or firing employees, and lowering the actual value of the company, and pushing all this money out of the company to raise the perceived value of the company. And the reason I keep emphasizing the difference between perceived and actual is, to go back to the apples example. Let's say I have an apple. Let's say I do some economics shenanigansing, like we used as an example earlier. How there's like 3 or 4 mystery apples that may or may not exist, and how those apples are not trading well, and the prices are going down, and the fund's doing, and all the signs show that me and my Apple company are going right down the tubes and have zero value, but I still have this apple. There is a difference between perceived value and tactile, actual value, and I think acknowledging that and understanding the difference between the two is important, and something that way, way, way too many people do not do. Don't mistake me, perceived value has its place. I mean, the only reason you guys are here is because you perceive that I have value. But reality is reality. Yeah, the South Sea Company. That's a company that had no actual value. That's a good parallel, actually. So for those of you not aware, there's a company called the South Sea Company, which was going to sell exclusive rights to trading on all these Spanish ports in South America, right? And there's a lot. This is a whole mess, and I'm going to try not to go into depth in it. But the only thing you need to take away from this is that company had it had extremely little actual value. It had an enormous amount of perceived value, huge perceived value, very, very, very low actual value. Now you might think, well, that's strange, and indeed, a lot of people made a lot of money off of this, and then, well, here's the problem. Obviously, I have my opinion on this matter, but I can also point to history. History has shown repeatedly that anytime there is this kind of a gap, things go very badly, and this led to what could arguably be called an economic collapse of at least 3 separate countries. And that's underselling it, if I'm being completely blunt. Because perceived value, you know, if you look at this, I know this sounds so stupid, but if you look at a company and say, that company's doing really well, let's tie this economic thing to that. And now you have actual value tied to perceived value. And if this perceived value goes down or up, then your actual value now has a separate perceived value, which is now going up or down, despite the fact that your company is actually doing fine. Now let's say if you actually tie in state economics, which is what happened with the South Sea Company, to this. So now the state's actual value had a separate perceived value based on this completely imagined wealth situation with the South Sea Company. In short, if you have a piece of paper that says, I have 12 apples, and they are worth $20. You can take this piece of paper, this legitimate document. I don't mean like something scribbled with crayon. I mean like if a banker or an economist comes to you and says, hey, this is where this is. You can take this fact and use that as something in your economic trades. Well, this is worth this much, and I own 3% of that, so I'd like to trade my 3% of that in order to fund this new loan that I'm getting from you. Remember, all of this comes from one dude with one apple. And I hate deckfish for some reason. I'm not sure why. It's just a thing. Now, I know some of you have come in the middle of this discussion, so I'm going to finish by saying the same thing I started with. What does all this mean for the immediacy? Absolutely nothing. Because all that's happened right now is the dice have been rolled, but no one's looked at that value. Until people look at what the actual values are of the dice, and then judge what's going to happen based on that, none of this matters. I hate to say that, but it's true. This could be completely undone. This could be a situation, because that's actually a power they have. They have the power to just, to not do a good snap. There we go. To completely undo and reverse. They could bail out. They could add more legalization. They could get this tied up in the courts for years. That's probably going to happen, by the way. There's a lot of possibilities here, and none of them have happened yet. But it is worth noting, at its baseline, short selling makes sense. It's just stupid and probably shouldn't be allowed. I borrow your apple. I sell your apple. The price of your apple goes down. I buy your apple. Or sorry, borrow. I keep using the wrong word. Borrow. I borrow your apple, sell your apple, buy your apple. Boom. That's short selling in a nutshell. Or, on the other side of that thing, I lend the apple. I charge interest for the fact that you are using my apple. I sell the apple to you. That's short selling in a nutshell. So anyways, believe it or not, that's actually all I got this week. There has been a few other news tidbits, but that's been the big one. We will see what actually happens, because we're not there yet. It is also probably worth noting, so I hope you were paying attention during this whole thing, because I structured these 3 points I wanted to talk about for a very specific reason. And that first one I talked about was the weight. Group of people have weight, money has weight. This is one of the reasons why this is a unique situation, because all these groups of people have done is done what companies have been doing for literally centuries. They're not an actual formalized official group, they're just a bunch of people who have all agreed to do the same thing. And that's one of the reasons why this is interesting legally, because it's hard to reach out and say, you don't have the ability to coordinate with others legally. Like, you might say, well, that's easy to say, but again, it is much harder than you'd think to reach out and legally prevent people from coordinating economic transactions. How should the average Joe prepare for retirement? A gun! Oh, you mean the economic version. Gun and one bullet, because you only need one. Or just tell Arno that you secretly killed Elise, and it'll take care of itself. That is a very, very difficult question, Ice-Tray. Let me say this to you. If I won the lottery, let me rewind a second, because I actually do have, I have another topic here. I'm trying to read chat at the same time, and I'm failing at it. One of the only things I can't do is read chat and talk at the same time. What's the other topic? I've already lost it. It's gone. Something about... So this is related. How many of you guys... Let me rewind here. Question. You just won the lottery. What do you do? Honest answer. I'm very curious what your guys' knee-jerk reaction. You just won the lottery. What do you do? Doesn't matter, Loner. 7-digit range. Okay, that actually got a smile out of my Shadow Machine, I'll give you that. Now, what I was expecting to hear is what I am hearing, which is good, because I hate being wrong. The overwhelming number of you guys and gals said the same thing. Roughly. You said it in different words, but you all said the same general thing. Invest. The older I've gotten, the more I think that's the wrong move. Hear me out for a second, okay? This is getting a little bit more real than I like to get on my show, but forgive me. I did a bit of a thought exercise over the last several days as this whole thing was developing about why it is that investing is such a go-to answer. About why that's the automatic result. What do? Well, you gotta hire a financial planner, and you gotta hire an estate planner, and you get a lawyer involved, and you get them, and you just send the money off to the hedge funds who do all the stuff I was already talking about before. You just let other people manage your money, right? You get that money invested, you get that money working for you. Why is that the default answer? Now, I have no evidence of this, but I think it's because of World War II and the Cold War. I'm dead serious. I think that it's specifically because of the fact that that so many of the people who were alive during that period of time went through some interesting economic times in the immediate wake of... Sorry, I should also mention the Great Depression. In the immediate wake of the Great Depression. And you'll notice that there's this cultural variance between investing and safe investing. I'm using different terminology, but I bet most of you know what I'm talking about without me even having to explain. There's day trading, right? There's playing the stock market, and then there's investing. And investing is good, and this is bad. And again, Great Depression. I feel like there has been a built-up cultural shift, and again, this only really applies in the States, because I only left this country once, guys and gals, but I feel like there is this cultural shift to try and emphasize that there is good investing and bad investing, and you should do good investing, that it is the smart thing to do, that it is the responsible thing to do, that it's the adult thing to do. I cannot be the only person who has seen fiction and real life push that particular idea constantly since I was a child, since I was the one-digit range. South Park made fun of this in an episode. You know, I'm trying to teach him the value of investing, and then blah blah. And even while they were making fun of it, they were still making the same point. That the idea was that investing was a good thing, and being responsible equated to stocking your money away and making sure it would go into a system and blah, 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 right? Now, what does that have to do with World War II and the Cold War? That's a little more complicated, but it has to do with how various countries, most notably this country, was ripping itself out of a massive financial hole because of the Great Depression and World War II. The economic side of World War II is probably one of the single most fascinating elements in all of human history to me personally. I know, war geek, history geek, economics geek, but the point is that the United States ripped itself out of that, and I feel like a lot of the why was because this was something that was pushed hard. So our grandparents, well, my age range, were raised in that mentality, which leads to my parents, who were growing up and having that grilled into them, which leads to them grilling it into me. You see the logic here? Now you're probably thinking, well, investing is good, isn't it? The older I get, and the more I study economics and culture and society and the function and structure of a civilization, the more I question that. Investment, just investing into something, is not what I'm talking about, to be 100% clear. I'm talking about getting into the investment markets, buying stocks, holding on to shares, trading in futures, right? And so, look, the more I get older, the more I look at that being like, because not only, and Hazda said this earlier, and it's worth repeating, most people lose money on stocks, in just stocks, which is only a single structure of the investment, of the overall investment umbrella. Most people lose money on stocks. And if you zoom out the camera for a second, that makes perfect sense. That's exactly how that should work, as horrible as that sounds. That's how the system is designed to work, because it is a form of gambling. Now, there's also the incestuous thing, which I don't want to get into right now. Yeah, exactly, plutonium. It's supernatural. Barely that doesn't work. Now, it might work out well, but it probably won't. But as weird as this may sound, that's not the perspective I'm using here. I don't mean I wouldn't invest because I would be afraid of losing the money, because that's normal. I've known that for decades. I've known that since I was in high school. That's just gambling 101. You never gamble what you can't afford to lose. Period. That is literally gambling 101. I could phrase it differently. Walk into gambling expecting to lose all that you have walked into gambling with. There you go. There's a different way to phrase that. But that's not what I mean. The older I get, the more I think that dropping a few $1,000,000 onto the investment market, even if I did so in smart investing, would make the world a worse place. And I suppose that's my answer to you, Ice Tray. You can do whatever you want with regards to your money long term, but I legitimately think that if I actually won the lottery, I'm not sure I'd invest any of it. Not counting basic banking, which is kind of unavoidable in the modern society. Well, that's investing, which is not investing or investing. That's just a different concept. If I walk up to Luneruth, and say, I would like to fund you making your music videos and doing your music. That's investing, but that's not what I'm talking about. If I reach out and start buying up... By the way, one of the other things that happened recently is water is now a tradable future, which is one of the scariest things I've heard in the last decade. I'm not joking, by the way. That is terrifying. The fact that we can actually turn water... The fact that water is something you can trade in now. Anyways. Yeah, that is actually insane. What's really sad, if I know I have no way to prove this, I've seen this coming a long time. Freshwater reserves and freshwater supplies have been slowly getting harder and harder to come by, and more of a problem at a species level for decades. And God, I want to say back in 2011 or 2012, I forget which, please forgive me, I noticed that there were several big oil barons who had started just buying water. And if you see a big oil baron doing something, that's what actually caught my attention. You see a big oil baron being whunk, it's something that should probably catch your attention. And I was just like, wait. What? Research. All I gotta say is California almonds. I should probably explain that. So almonds are a high water crop. It means the amount of water. Most crops have there's a formula when it comes to them, and there's Nestle is bad, but that's unrelated. Most crops have a formula: X amount of time, X amount of area, real estate, X amount of water, X amount of manpower equals Y amount of product equals Z amount of profit. Okay. Pretty basic formula, right? And that's just kind of universal. That's how most companies handle what to farm and where. Almonds are a high water. They require a fairly large amount of water. They also sell very well. They are more expensive than most other products. So guess how much farmland in California over the last several years has been shuffled over to almonds? And you get it. This is, of course, the most obvious and blatant example, which is why I used it. I figured, I think I have viewers who live in California. Don't tell me, I don't want to dox anyone. But yeah, I use that example because it's one of the most overt examples of what I'm talking about. Trading in water. God. You gotta be kidding, Tesla. I know you're not. I know you're not. Yeah, $100 for a bottle of real water. Cyberpunk. Or it was 50. It was 50. 50 euros for a bottle of water. It's real water, though. What's really sad is the water equation is actually relatively easy to solve at a species level. The problem is that would require investment. Not this type of investment, and not this type of investment. This type of investment. I have no idea how many people or groups out there are doing this type of investment into water. I hope it's more than none. Does that answer your question, Hazardous? That's funny. Fun Falkenstein. I didn't even check the value, personally. So that would be your financial news for the day. Yeah, who wants to talk about ponies and making friends? I had one last thing really quick. I had a discussion with my sister a couple weeks ago. Now, she incorrectly assumed I have depression, which is not actually the case, as I've talked about before. And one of the reasons that she used as a piece of evidence for that was that one of the things I tend to do is blinders. You know, one of the only ways that I can deal with everyday life and existence is by putting up the blinders. And she was like, and that means, and I'm like, no. I'm not speaking hyperbolically, sis. All I'm doing is paying attention. So we'll see what happens with the stock trading thing. For now, I am going to go ahead and chop off the local recording. That's your positivity for the day.